Hi, I'm Kate Rosenblum. I'm a clinical and a developmental psychologist at the University of Michigan, where I work both in the Department of Psychiatry, where I direct our parent-infant program and our parenting program for toddlers and preschoolers called the Parent-Child Relational Clinic. And I'm also a research scientist at the Center for Human Growth and Development. And I'm excited to be here with you all today and to present with Julie on this topic.
Thanks, Kate. So I'm Julie Robato. I'm a clinical assistant professor at the University of Michigan and was in the field for about 22 or 23 years before I went there, including some of that time as an infant mental health specialist, working in the home, and also doing child welfare, public health, education, early Head Start. So I worked pretty much in every sector of the public domain using an infant mental health model since about 1986. So hopefully some of that experience will come through as we go through the day. So I am really happy to be here. It's always fun to present with Kate and then to see like old faces. Some of you have been doing this long enough that you could be up here, so we could trade places at some point in time. But I'm going to just right now set the groundwork for what we're going to be doing today, and then I'm going to be turning it over to Kate. So in true infant mental health fashion, Kate and I had arranged like the day that we kind of go back and forth, and then she called me about 3 weeks ago with this distressed tone in her voice. Her daughter has a poetry cafe today, and she came home excitedly. Mom, did you see the note? You know, there's a poetry cafe. And Kate saw the date, and it's today at 1 o'clock, and she was like crestfallen, and she told Clara, I don't think I can be there, and Clara just like drooped. So Kate called and said, like after I think several days of agonizing, and said, what do you think if, I take the morning, you take the afternoon, and then I can go to Clara's Poetry Cafe. And I'm like, absolutely, you have to. I would have been angry if you didn't, do that, because what are we about, right? We're about relationships, we're about parenting, we're about following our child's leads and knowing what they need. And she knew that Clara needed to have her there. So a few days later, she says to Clara, guess what? I have great news. And Clara looks up, you can come to the Poetry Cafe. So it was very clear that Kate nailed it and knew exactly what Clara needed. So she'll be presenting most of the morning. I'll be doing most of the afternoon, and she will be enjoying Clara's Poetry Cafe. And we will all be with you in spirit, because that's an exciting venture for her. So this morning, what we're going to be doing, or for the layout of the day, just to kind of give you an overview, we are going to be Kate's going to be looking a lot at templates of attachment, specifically in the home environment. Like, how are we going to be looking for the developing relationship in the home environment? What are some of the core features that we see in interaction that can help us understand what template is developing for the child, what state of mind, in some respects, the parent might have regarding relationships. So we're going to be doing, going back and forth between kind of theory and videotape throughout the morning. Then in the afternoon, we're going to be moving then into using all of this for intervention. So I'll be doing a case presentation of a home-based intervention, and then from there we'll take a look at a couple other intervention modalities and then move into practice. So this is what we see. What style of attachment do you think is unfolding? What do you think the story is being told between the parent and the child? And where would we begin? So our charge was attachment, observing it, understanding it, and intervening with it in the home environment. So hopefully all of that will unfold today. So our goals include, again, observing, assessing, and working with an attachment in the context of the home-based work. And using some components of attachment theory so that we can use home-based behaviors to understand what it is that we're seeing. So we're not always getting most of us aren't getting strange situation procedures that are coded so you know exactly what you're contending with. So understanding what those behaviors might mean in the home environment can be really important to figuring out what's your port of entree. And then an opportunity to consider the unfolding process. So how is it that attachment develops through the course of that first year? I have to say, Kate, every time I listen to her in this, I learn something new. So it's really, I get to sit and listen to her, and it's a blast, because the nuanced understanding of how a baby and parent negotiate that budding relationship, I think is some of the core of our work. So we hope that comes through today. And then examples of attachment-based interventions in the home, we'll be taking a look at that. Tools and materials to facilitate working with families. So Kate's gonna be reviewing some questions of the working model of the interview, working model of the child interview, so that you can have in mind some of these questions that can help kind of get at the parent's representation of relationships and what is it that they're thinking about when they're with their child or when they're thinking about their child. So we'll be reviewing that, and then opportunities to interact and practice together. So hopefully it will be more of a packed day than just sitting there taking notes, that there'll be some time for interaction and exchange as well. I think like a fun day for me would just to be sitting and watching videotapes and videotape after videotape after videotape and saying, okay, what do you see? What do you see? What do you see? Because how we understand where we look, how we understand what we're seeing and what it means, and then how to intervene, I think is some of the core kind of crystallizing moments in our work. So hopefully this afternoon we'll have some fun doing that. We did want to check in and see what your goals are. Like, what are some of the things that you hope for today? Any burning, like, I have to leave today with this? Yes, Sue. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and that's always the trickiest piece, right? Because that's the nuanced piece. That's who the parent is, what they're bringing, who the baby is, what they're made up of, who we are and what we're taking in, and how all of that plays together, much less, the other siblings in the environmental context. So I think that's always the trickiest piece. But I hope what we're gonna do is help us think about strands that go into making that in-the-moment decision of where are we gonna go with this. I think that's always for me, like I'm with a family, I'm looking, I'm feeling, I'm experiencing, I'm seeing, and I'm like, okay, what is all of this, how is this coming together right now that's gonna help me inform what I say next? Mm-hmm. Uh-huh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting, because the video that we're going to be looking at this afternoon of the parent and the child that I worked with together, I actually did take more of a directive technique in terms of them engaging together. So, and we're also going to be looking at videotape, using videotape for intervention. So we'll have a chance to practice with some of that as well, like looking at a videotape together with a family. And how might we use that in order to help them move beyond talking about it to actually reflecting and then doing. So, yeah, okay. Any other burning desires? That probably captures it for a lot of us, right? Yeah. We want to know what to do. And sometimes it's more who to be. And I think that's sometimes the hardest piece to sit with. Yeah. Okay, any other? All right, I think then I'll turn it over to Kate and we will get going.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Is this okay? All right, I have the mic on, but I just have to say how grateful I am, both to Julie and to you all for understanding about the Poetry Cafe. Thank you. I did agonize for a little while because it's not, my preferred thing to sort of change plans like this. But Julie left out a part of the story that I will add, which is when I first told her that I couldn't make it because I was teaching, she looked at me, she goes, well, can't you just get a substitute? That's what my teacher does. I thought. So, sometimes kids tell us what we need to hear. They sort of lead us. Okay. So today, as Julie described, we're going to spend more time in the morning just thinking about the conceptual frame, thinking about attachment, using video to sort of observe, thinking about observations. I'm going to jump around a little bit between videos that are home-based and some that are clinic and lab-based because I think they just illustrate points, and try to do that thoughtfully. And then in the afternoon, there will also be much more opportunity to see some of our home-based clips. And it's really fun for Julie and I to share some of the home-based tapes with you all because they come from research that we're doing together on an intervention model, which some of you may be familiar with now, called Mom Power. And Julie will be sharing with you some of the materials from Mom Power, so you'll have some of that to take home with you. And the home visits are home visits that we're doing as part of our evaluation. So that's kind of fun for us to be able to share that with you. I'm also going to encourage you to talk when we see the videotapes. Now, I'm guessing, sort of looking around the room, that there are some new faces for me and a number of familiar, friendly faces. And part of what I'm thinking about when I see that is that there are going to be video clips that are new for you, and there are going to be some that are familiar. And that's okay, because I often talk with parents about this when we're running groups, like when we do Mom Power, we do Circle of Security, or another one of our interventions. I talk with folks about visiting old friends and the power that lies in being able to see things over and over again. I have to tell you that I'm not going to show you any videotape that I haven't myself seen many, many times. And I have to say, every time I watch it and every time I discuss it with people, I hear new things, see new things, appreciate new things. So I hope you will feel comfortable with sort of recognizing and being familiar, and just sort of see it as an opportunity to look in a more nuanced way at some of the tapes. And then I'm sure there will be some that are new for you as well. Okay. So, basically, I just want to start with an obvious point for all of us, but, this notion of attachment is absolutely hardwired in us. And babies come into the world so prepared to do this. It's really remarkable if you do work with foster families, for example, and you watch how rapidly a child who is in one environment can really begin to unfold an attachment relationship with a new parent. It just speaks to the incredible sort of drive that little people have. We actually have data to tell us that children under the age of 3, when they're placed with a foster parent, will, within 3 months of age, within 3 months of placement, so they've moved to the new home, and within 3 months, they have developed an attachment style that corresponds to their kin or foster parent provider. Now, this isn't to say this is a neutral thing to do. I actually advocate, not moving kids unless absolutely, absolutely necessary. Remove the danger, but not the child or the parent if at all possible. But I think what that data tells us is something about how just incredibly powerful this drive is in this unfolding process. And it's evident in every moment, more or less, of every day. So every waking hour is an opportunity to see the attachment system and the exploration system in action and in balance with one another. And why am I saying this now? Because you already know this. But I think the reason I'm saying this is that all of our home observations are opportunities to see the attachment and exploration system in action. And it's really a question of sort of asking ourselves what's happening right here and right now, and how can I understand this within a certain conceptual frame. And so this morning, what I'd like to do is really spend time talking about the conceptual frame. The other piece is that when we become parents, something kicks in that is described in the literature as the caregiving system. And the caregiving system is really what sort of drives and underlies the parent's capacity to provide the care and nurturance that the child needs. It's this innate sense of how to be close to and care for the baby. Now, I think it's really important to make the point that almost every parent, it probably doesn't even need the qualification really, wants to do the best they can for their baby, right? They want their child to be successful. They want their child to succeed. Their capacity to bring that to fruition effectively can vary rather dramatically. But what we're doing when we're working with parents is we're really trying to capture that innate motivation to do the best they can for their child and to find the way that we can partner with them in doing that. Is part of the trick, and I think is probably a huge part of how we are contributes to, right? It's about how we can join caregivers in becoming the best possible parents for that child that they can be. And that's what they want, and that's why they come to us for help. All right. I'm going to talk today about attachment at multiple levels, and it bears sort of saying a little bit about what those levels are, because I'm going to ask you to be looking at clips and thinking about each of these levels when you're watching them. So at the sort of basic core level, there are the primary sort of attachment behaviors. This is the things that we come into the world hardwired to do. Babies cry, and that signals caregivers, right? What else do they do that signals a caregiver? They smile, yeah, exactly. I love that one because, oftentimes I think probably we don't forget that, but it's worth pointing out that there's nothing like a baby smiling or laughing to bring people to him or her, right? So this is a very powerful attachment eliciting behavior. Eventually, as motor skills develop and things like that, we can, begin to do things like seek proximity through crawling or things like that, right? That make it possible for the baby to propel him or herself as opposed to trying to bring you to them. It's less just magnet and more action-oriented. But all of these things are very procedural, or very very basic sort of attachment system behaviors that have an evolutionary sort of function to promote survival. Now, what happens over time is that the baby and parent live certain kinds of experiences. And essentially, I think of this middle level, the sensory motor procedural level, as the dance. This is the dance that evolves between the parent and child. And it is a beginning of forming these internal working models, right? The sort of script or model schema that says how I am in relation to you, dad or grandma or mom. And what we see here is that babies are showing us, for example, in some situations, it's okay to show my feelings. If I'm upset, I can show mom that I'm upset and I can go close to her. Or, when I get upset, mom sometimes rejects or ignores it, and the best way that I can stay close to her is not to show how much I need her right now. So I'm going to kind of shut that down, and that way she'll stay close and not reject, and I can maintain proximity, which is my goal. This is a dance that evolves over time, and it's not a magic process. It unfolds on the basis of day-to-day lived experience, but it becomes this internal working model, the template. So when we talk about infant attachment classifications, right, which you all are familiar with, and we're going to talk about a little bit more today, that's at this sensory motor procedural level. We're watching the child, and we're looking at what does the child do in times of distress, and in terms of seeking proximity, in terms of exploring when in the presence of the caregiver. All right? And if you think about it from the caregiver side, at the procedural level, I think we're often talking about those sort of behaviors that parents do in a non-conscious way that show the child, I can be a secure base for you. You can go off and explore the world and feel comfortable because I'm here. And, also I can be a safe haven for you. So if you're feeling worried or distressed or upset, come here. I'm your safe haven. I'm welcoming you in. And there are all kinds of things that parents do behaviorally and not consciously that are very procedural. Right? It's a kind of a memory system that we're not thinking about. Although what's nice about it is that you can think about it and you can make changes to how you are, which is really powerful. So parents can really make use of being able to step out of a moment and see the moment and consider other ways of being with their child, for example. So we'll talk more about that later. And then the final level is this cognitive representational level. So as we develop, we have these internal working models, but we're increasingly able to sort of articulate or describe things and have certain aspects of the way we think about relationships subject to our conscious recall, right? We can tell you how I am. I can tell you, this is how I am with my friends, this is how I am with my daughter, this is how I am with my parents, this is my relationship with my parents, right? And, you know, it's typically fairly verbal, is how we tap into it. And we can see it in kids, and we can see it in adults. And I want to share with you today more the adult side of that. When I'm thinking about kids, how many of you are familiar with the attachment doll play story stems? Anyone familiar with that? So these doll play story stems, the MacArthur, pardon me, some people call them the MacArthur story stems or the attachment doll play task. Okay. Well, this is a way that you can tap into little kids' ways of thinking about relationships by sort of telling stories. So if I have a moment, I'll share a little bit about that as well, because that's kind of a fun thing to do. And it allows you to sort of look at kids' play as meaningful in another way, right? As conveying something about their cognitive representational world around relationships. But certainly we can tap into parents' representations. How many folks are familiar with the adult attachment interview? Okay, or the working model of the child interview? A number of you? Okay, I think people stopped lifting their hands because I know there are some people who didn't raise their hand who know it. But yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's tapping into the representational and cognitive level. Questions so far? Things that are unclear? All of these things operate in concert with one another. And this is a really important point as well, because when we're thinking about intervention, you know, sometimes what we're doing is we're working with parents to address the ghosts, and we're doing a psychotherapy where we're talking about the past, and you know, it's very focused on understanding the impact of your early caregiving experiences and how it affects how you feel and how it affects how you are in the present. And I would say at that point, our port of entry is sort of at that cognitive representational level, right? But if it stopped there, that wouldn't be good enough for most of us, right? What we really want to see is that that then sort of feeds down into the procedural level, that it changes the way you're able to be a secure base or a safe haven, which shifts the dance for the baby, which changes the baby's internal working model, and which feeds to different representational sorts of styles. But that's not the only way to do it. We also can think about the procedural level. And, you know, if we can shift ways of being. So sometimes I think when we target parenting sensitivity, for example, in some of our interventions, I think sometimes what we do is we shift behavior before the representation has really gotten there. But if you shift behavior and now baby responds differently to you because you're responding differently to baby, that feeds upwards, right? Because now I might feel less helpless, I might feel more efficacious, I might feel more like, oh, my baby does need me, my baby does come to me, I can do these things, and I might develop a more secure sort of representational style. So these things really feed back and forth. And this is also an important point, the sort of behavioral level, the signaling. Think about kids that you know who are not really effective in their signaling, right? And they don't, or if they do signal, they do it in a way that is overwhelming or threatening or distressing because it's so dysregulated for physiological sorts of reasons. For example, when we think about the sensory sort of functioning of a child, sometimes we're thinking about how can we help support, you know, the signaling that happens, the sort of basic biologically driven piece, in a way that is more productive and helpful for that relationship. So each level has potential for intervention. All right, so a little bit about thinking about the earliest stages from birth to 6 and also the time period of the onset of focused attachment, 7 to 18 months. I just want to, Julie and I thought, you know, thinking developmentally, very important. We're going to be showing you video clips from across different ages, but want to make a point that these early relationships are forming right from the get-go. This period of birth to 6 months is really the period of emerging representation. So the attachment system is, you know, sort of building up and ramping up to that procedural level. The parent at the representational level has a major task when the baby is born. There's the imagined baby that is wished for, hoped for, or feared during the months of pregnancy and even before that, right? And then the baby comes, and there's this intense period of getting to know the real baby and the reconciliation that happens if there's a difference in some way between what you imagined and what you hoped for and who the real baby is and what the baby brings. And this can be both reassuring, it can be scary, it can be all these things, but the representational function goes through a major transformation at the time of birth and in the early months of life. The early patterns that are being established are patterns of what we call co-regulation. So baby comes on board and has basically more or less almost no capacity to self-regulate. It's rather dramatic. I don't know how all of you felt if you have kids, but I can tell you a PhD in developmental and clinical psychology does not make you immune from feeling that sort of sense of panic and terror that you have bringing home your newborn and thinking, oh my goodness, I have to keep her alive, right? Like we all know that intense, deep feeling. And it comes from the fact that the baby is completely dependent on you for everything, for survival. This pattern of co-regulation is so important because it also forms the basis for the child's capacity for self-regulation. Right? And there's going to be a slide that you're going to get from Julie later in the day that really speaks to how that happens over time. But I kind of like to, I talk with parents about this all the time. I like to make it real. How does a child move from co-regulation to self-regulation? And for this, I sort of draw from some of my own mentors. Bob Marvin does a lovely job talking about this. And so if you'll allow me, I will say, I want you to sort of imagine a baby just 1 month old, distressed. And when baby is distressed, what is he or she experiencing? Well, first of all, sort of put yourself in that mindset, all right? You're feeling hunger, and it's an uncomfortable feeling, and you don't really have a schema overall for what this is about or what it means exactly, though you're starting to. But that discomfort causes you to feel, sort of some pain, some distress. And so your body starts to tense up, right? And if you look at, a 3-week-old, a 4-week-old, when they're unhappy, this isn't, right? No, no, this is, and I can't even do the sound. It's a horrible baby sound, but whole body, head to toe, right? Tense, distressed, crying. So I'm feeling, and that crying is really distressing too. Now there's a loud noise and my body is so tense and I'm yelling so loudly. And then all of a sudden, what was that? Somehow I'm moving and someone's touching me. And I'm moving in space a little bit differently. And I'm still crying, so it's still feeling not good, but oh, there's a sound now. Someone's talking to me, right? And now there's something warm on my cheek, and I'm turning my head, and there's something warm. And I can suck, and it feels so good. That's, I can suck, I can start to feel better, and now there's something warm and good in my mouth, and it's going down into my stomach, and I'm not so hungry anymore, and there's someone talking to me and holding me, and I'm warm and I'm comfortable. And this is really nice, right? So what just happened? Does anyone want to try and describe what just happened? at a meta level? Give it a thought. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 So I love that you tied it to that. So at a procedural level, this beginning of the sort of templates, right? It's, I have this new sort of feeling of touch that, the movement, all of these things happen in response to my distress, right? So if we think about it from that sort of meta level, what we see is that there's distress, arousal, and regulation, right? And how many times does this happen a day? Thousands, yes. It happens over and over and over again, right? Distress, arousal, and then hopefully regulation. And what happens is that the baby is, not experiencing this alone, right? The baby is experiencing this distress, arousal, and regulation in the arms of another. And so what begins to happen is this sort of learning of a template, if you will, of I can get aroused and distressed, and I can be comforted and I can soothe. And not only can I do that, but I can do that with my go-to person as the person who helps me to do it, right? This is being learned over and over and over again. Distress, arousal, regulation. What is self-regulation? Distress, arousal, regulation, right? Life is distressing. I mean, how many times a day do you have to go through that cycle? Right? How many times a day do you have to go through? Okay, distress, arousal, all right, deep breath, I can do this, right? Regulation. And maybe sometimes you can't do it alone, and hopefully you also have a go-to person that you can connect with in the grown-up ways, maybe, face-to-face, maybe on the phone, but that helps sort of bring you back to, okay, I can do this. And my guess is if you're the kind of person who can, pick up the phone and call, that speaks to the fact that you've had that, experience of distress, arousal, and regulation in the presence with the assistance of another, right? And if you haven't had that experience, what are you left with? Arousal and distress, right? Now, this is not all, I love sort of bringing it back to the lived moment, because I think we can get really theoretical about this and forget how day-to-day and concrete all of this is, and how important every single moment is in establishing the later capacity for self-regulation, right? What we know is that it has underlying biological sort of underpinnings. So now we know actually that there are different systems that are activated during this sequence. And one example would be the stress hormone cortisol, right? Distress, arousal, cortisol released, regulation, there's a feedback loop, it drops off. That's good because cortisol is neurotoxic, it kills brain cells we don't want. It also prevents brain cells from connecting. It can have impact on memory systems especially. So, we don't want the brain flooded with cortisol. That's just not a good thing. Distress, arousal, regulation is the underpinnings of establishing these effective self-regulation sort of skills at a biological level and at a behavioral level. So how do we get to a self-regulated state? Through co-regulation. And that's an important message that we share, for example, in Mom Power with parents. You want your child to be able to do that him or herself. That makes sense. Every parent wants their child to be self-regulated and able to do those kinds of things. You know how they get there? They get there by having someone who helps them learn, how to do that over and over and over again. We'll walk parents through exactly what I just walked you through. All right. In that example, the baby is also developing something that I think is critically important, which is a sense of agency, a sense that I can signal a need and it will be responded to. And so it's not just that someone else is taking care of all of my needs, right? Co-regulation isn't just about I'm helpless in that process, because the baby is actually using those sort of very basic, communications to signal I have a need, and it brings someone to them. And this is developing that template, right? And so there is a sense of agency, and agency is essentially the opposite of helplessness, which is so important. Now, I want you to just take a moment and think about the fact that everything that I just said applies equally well to the parents you're working with, right? There's nothing about that that is unique only to babies. That, parents also experience distress and arousal, and you can become their go-to person to help the regulating. Many of them haven't had that experience, and so they stay in distress arousal, and they need skills, or they need a relationship, or they need both, that helps them begin to develop a sense of I can go to someone and regulate. All right. It also establishes the feelings of trust, the sort of Ericksonians. Babies begin to develop an anticipation, right, of what will happen. So I know if I'm upset, someone will come to me. None of this is perfect, and that's actually good, because the other thing that's not on here that's really important to underscore, and thank goodness this is true, because as a parent, I certainly take some sense of relief in this. It's actually really important that we don't get it right every single time, and we don't get it right, quickly enough, and we can't always figure out exactly what it is that's going to bring on the regulation, and we struggle to figure that out sometimes. That's part of the dance. Sometimes we step on each other's toes, but it's through that process of figuring it out together that we both create the template of, I'm going to try and figure this out with you, right? And that the baby also has to work a little bit at it to sort of, say, no, that didn't quite do it, right? Like that wasn't quite right. And it's this sort of coming together. Sometimes we call this process interactive repair or repairs. And it's through that process of interactive repairs that usually the parent takes the lead on early in life, that the child begins to develop more and more self-regulation strategies as well. Just think, if you met the baby's need perfectly every single time, why would he or she need to develop, more capacity or more ability to sort of take on more of that role? And then finally, I just put here postpartum depression and anxiety issues because they are so highly prevalent in our population. That sort of the families that y'all are working with, I would say, highly prevalent and really impact this whole process, right? Because it impacts a person's motivation, affect, engagement. The story that I told might feel really different if mom was very flat and didn't talk, right? Just picked you up and sort of put a bottle in your mouth, right? Or if mom was highly anxious and kind of panicked as she was trying to do all the things that she was trying to do, move quickly through lots of things, right? And so now the baby's experiencing a different sort of reality. So these are highly prevalent things that can really shape the way that pattern of sort of code to self-regulation unfolds. Questions, thoughts, comments before I move on? Okay. Other things that are happening in this co-regulation process are things like affective sharing, beginning to develop that sort of emotional dance and attunement, and the emergence of that particular relationship. Fundamentally, the last bullet point is really, the critically important point, which is that what the baby is doing is learning about emotion and the self through these interactions. And so when we're watching in the home or anywhere else that we watch, it's really this dance that is forming a foundation for developing a sense of self. So One way to think about this is if you think of these as interactive events, these are the moment-to-moment sorts of things that are happening. The baby begins to generalize from very early on. So the baby already has this incredible capacity to generalize from birth, essentially. They do studies where they show, habituation studies where they show faces. And they might vary the faces slightly. So the baby sees like 4 or 5 faces, right? And then what they do is they keep showing the faces until the baby habituates to each of them, right? So they stop being sort of excited or interested because it's like, I've seen that one before, right? And then if you show them something new, they stop sucking and they look because they're attentive to this sort of thing, right? But if you show them instead a conglomerate, an average of the faces that they've previously seen, they keep on sort of sucking away, right? From very, very early on, they've already generalized across the faces that they've seen to this new face. This is amazing, right? And this is what's underlying their sort of internally sort of generalizing experience. They equally generalize what it feels like when dad puts me, to bed, when grandma is changing my diaper, when mom is feeding me, when we're playing together. All of these experiences get generalized into these sort of templates that eventually get sort of generalized into what it feels like to be with my parent, and ultimately a sense of self in relationship to others. Now, babies really, are both, interested in the fact that things generalize, right? They have a sort of internal, but they also notice when things are a little bit different. And I want to share a video with you. Let's see. Maybe some of you have seen this before. Raise your hand if you've seen this. Okay, this is a home videotape from Israel. It's a TV show, so pardon the background. I mean, it's a home video that was, I assume if I read Hebrew, which I don't, that it's essentially like America's favorite home videos, Israeli style. So just enjoy this and enjoy seeing how the baby sort of has a schema that he applies.
ילדים של החיים. עיניי פקוחות מבלי לראות את השמיים, מבלי לראות כחול של ים ירוק של עץ, מבלי לשמוע מנגינות יפות כמו פעם, מבלי לראות את הדברים כמו שהם. ילדים קטנים, ילדים גדולים, ילדים טובים וילדים רעים. את יודעת אמא, כולנו ילדים של החיים. אני נושם, אני חבוט בזרוע.
Okay. So I have to say, I love this little guy. He's just, or girl, I actually don't know, but the little baby who's crawling up, and it's, you kind of imagine mom's doing yoga fairly often, right? Because that pose is impressive. But, it's this sort of combination of, I know what to do here, right? But also the stop. Did you notice that? Sort of looking like, oh, well, okay. I'll keep going. But it just, is a fun sort of example of a baby applying a schema, knowing. You thought it was a father at first? Oh, yeah, not a father. Interesting. It's also fun to show because, can you imagine a video like that making it on American TV? Never. But isn't it beautiful? So anyways, this is just a nice example. Babies are aware, they have schemas, they are applying them, and they also notice things that are discrepant. Oh, I was going to show another. actually. I'm gonna have to open it, pardon me, sorry. Thought I had all my videos open, but I did not open one. Okay. This is an example from a lab, so it's not a home movie, and I'm not going to show you the whole thing. I'm going to actually just fast forward through some, and we'll watch it together. It's a mom of a 7-month-old, and this is another feeding example. So I just want, the sound is up. So thoughts, reactions, what did you see? In fact, if you had listened, did you hear the baby go, like gulp? That's how up the sound is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, there were some nice things that you could see that she was trying to do, right? Like, what kinds of things were those that you noticed? Yeah, she leaned over to look. Yeah, let the baby hold her finger. So these are the things that as an infant mental health therapist you would want to join with and around, right? But I'm also hearing that some of you thought maybe this mom is depressed. And what made you think that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The very flat affect. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it almost doesn't even look flat, maybe even sad. Yeah, what else? Distracted, worried. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. A lot of, and someone noted earlier the positioning of the baby. Thoughts about that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty far out. In fact, when she does want to look at the baby's face, and the baby's awake, so it's not that the baby's asleep or something or dozing off. Baby's awake. She has to do this, right? Because the baby is so far out, really. So tell me about this from the baby's perspective. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. So I'm being fed, but maybe I'm not experiencing. Well, tell me about it. I want to tell you. You guys tell me. What is it? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Baby's not making an effort. I'm really glad that you point that out, right? Right? Maybe it's been going on for a while, right? Baby's about 6, 7 months old, 7 months old, I think. And not making a lot of effort to snuggle up close, right? So what is feeding like? Mm-hmm. Yeah, not a lot of sounds or cooing or babbling or anything. I mean, baby's got a bottle in mouth, so, uh-huh, mm-hmm, yeah. So I think, all of the things that you're saying really speak to, if we sort of think about that dance, that baby is, being held. There are a lot of things that we want to point out as being positives, that mom is responding to fingers and is mouthing, which is nice. It'd be nice if we could get her to vocalize that, to sort of project it. But, baby is not experiencing a lot of closeness and warmth in this feeding exchange, right? This isn't pleasurable necessarily, or this is sort of my fantasy about what it's like to be this baby. Feeding is more functional. I'm hungry, I get fed. She does that, but it's not that it's warm and fun and cozy and playful. And I know we only had the briefest moment of that yoga videotape, right? But there's something about the way the baby approaches that, right? that has this sort of like, I'm going to get up right up close to you, right? I'm going to really be comfortable with you in this way that is, somehow a little bit warmer and, more interpersonally engaged. So I think, I show you this just to sort of make the point, because I'm sure you see things like this all the time, that these moment-to-moment experiences are experienced by the child in a way that begins to develop that internal working model, right? So you guys are good, because this mom was very depressed. She was actually the mother of twins, and this is her coming in with just one of her kids, and she is experiencing a very severe depressive episode at the time of this videotaping. So you're right on target that she's depressed and struggling. You know what I didn't say before I showed this, and I'm sorry that I didn't. First of all, the moms, and today it's all moms, actually, that I'm going to be showing you. They've all given permission for their tape to be used for training, which I really appreciate. That's such a gift, because videotape is powerful and it beats just hearing talking. It's also the case that they are real people, and so if you would recognize them, I would appreciate it if you would sort of say, hey, can you show me a different tape? We have lots of tapes to show you. I'd rather not show a tape of someone that anyone recognizes. We'll just skip it and move on to another one. So please let me know if that is the case. And I just am incredibly grateful, and I know we all are, for their willingness to share this. It is a brave thing. And I'm often amazed by the generosity of spirit that families show in allowing us to use these tapes. So I just want to make sure you know that it's with their knowledge. And a gift from them, really. But ultimately, this process of being with forms the template that then becomes the thing that guides how we are with other people in our interactions. And so we go from, how I am with my parent to my sense of self in relationship with others, and then ultimately, that's how I am with my baby in some way, right? That, ultimately, how I am in relationship to others becomes how I am when my baby has a need, and it sets that sort of intergenerational process. So early relationships lay a foundation for later relationships. And in our Mom Power group, we use the metaphor of a tree, which I'll be talking about in a little while, but we basically convey that same point that I just told you by talking about early foundations. And essentially, what you see here is that, this slide summarizes decades of research on attachment. And what we know is that attachment in infancy and early childhood is related essentially to all of these different things, right? And these different things include things like being more optimistic, having higher self-esteem, being more independent. This is really important to help parents understand that being more independent in a really true, authentic way requires actually having strong foundations, strong roots, that allow you to be more independent. To be persistent, to keep trying despite challenges, to self-soothe, to be better able to problem solve, to be more resilient, cooperative, kind to others, being able to ask for help, resisting peer pressure, trusting, getting along with others, having better relationships. All of these things have data behind them. Anyone interested, I can pull, summaries of studies that would support each of these conclusions. I share this with you because I share it with parents too. Because if you share this with parents and you ask them, are these things that you want for your child, what parent do you know who would say no? Do you know a parent yet who would say no? Have you ever met one? Because I haven't, right? Every parent wants this for their kids. Every parent wants them to be successful on some level. And what we try to sort of help parents to understand is that it's through building strong roots that you achieve the ability to have all of these different things. So early relationships are the foundation that allow all of those things to be possible. All right, questions, thoughts, comments before we move on briefly to toddlerhood and then take a break? Okay. So toddlerhood, the let me explore, don't leave me time period, I think that was you, Julie, yeah? Captures it all. There are a number of important developmental considerations when you're thinking about toddlers. That really the primary task is to practice being out in the world, exploring, learning, emerging autonomy, while at the same time balancing that need for connectedness. And if anything, the more you realize you can go out into the world, the more it sort of activates the, oh my gosh, I can really be far away from mom. That's scary too, right? Both of those things are real. There's continuing focus on affect regulation and behavioral control, so that distress arousal regulation, it's continuing, and the co-regulation that's required, it continues too. But now it's on so many more complex levels, right? And we'll watch some videos that really highlight that, I think. And the emergence of communication at multiple levels now, right? There's the nonverbal communication, but the emergence of verbal communication as well that's happening in this dance, in this partnership, that is really the focus of this time period. It's also true, and this is true in infancy as well, this isn't true just for toddlers, but that these early relationships can really be impacted by a variety of things that the baby or the toddler brings to the table. So this is not a one direction flow. I tried to imply that earlier, and I was so glad someone pointed out in the video of the mom feeding that the baby didn't turn to her, right? Because now to change this dance is really, it's challenging because baby has this template or this sort of model at this point that doesn't turn to mom. And so when we think about mom trying things out, we face this challenge of supporting mom as she might try other ways of being, but also, the potential that she could be discouraged, right? Because baby may not quite get that, we're trying to change the dance here and may not contribute to that. And baby, in fact, may have come already. We don't know. This baby may have already come with, some neurologic, temperamental sort of styles and differences that made him or her less likely to turn to signal clearly and effectively, to manage the potential for developing that arousal and regulation is probably partly also determined by temperament, right? And so it's not that the parent can't modify that, but you might have harder work ahead, right? It's not equally easy to parent all kids, right? And this is really important to acknowledge. And we have good data to tell us that when kids are more temperamentally difficult, fussy, irritable, they get to distress faster and they have a harder time sort of coming back down from that distress, that this is a challenge for parents. But we also have data to tell us that when parents can respond to that, when they can sort of meet the baby where they are, that this can really help the child to develop more effective self-regulatory skills as well, and can, still promote a secure attachment. So temperamental difficulties aren't determinative, but they definitely contribute to that early relationship. The important issue is what's in the second bullet point here, which is the goodness of fit and the parent's ability to adapt when faced with a child who maybe is different than what they expected or what they're used to doing. Actually, I'll draw from foster care again as another interesting example in this regard, because oftentimes foster parents will talk about, with some frustration, the things that I did for my kids aren't working, right? And the key is actually going to be, is this parent able to adapt, to understand that this child has different needs, maybe because of a history of abuse or neglect, that when they turn their back away, they actually need someone who's going to pick them up and hold them and cuddle them and love them, and they can't sort of trust the baby's signals and cues in the same sort of way, right? So that's an example of sort of having to adapt. So things may sort of be contributed by the child. The other thing is that we often find that toddlerhood is a time where parental representations sort of come alive. It's certainly possible in infancy, in the early stages as well, but how many of you have sort of witnessed, baby is wonderful, baby needs me, baby loves me, I love to play with baby, I love to be with baby, and he said no. He ran off the other direction, right? Something very different sort of gets triggered and comes online in this developmental period, often in response to these emerging expressions of autonomy and independence and defiance, right? That sort of come on board at around this time that can be very threatening for parents, and we can see real shifts in terms of what the parent is feeling about parenting this child at this time. Okay, obviously, relational difficulties have many different origins, but important to sort of acknowledge that some common challenges are when parents struggle with feelings about the child separating and becoming more autonomous, or when they can't sort of acknowledge, welcome, and delight in the child's need for connection, the welcoming back. When it's hard for parents to understand the inner world of the child is a separate person, or they have difficulty with regulating states, regulating behaviors in such a way that they're not able to validate their child's experience. We're going to watch some videotape, and I really want you to be thinking about how the parent implicitly is acknowledging the child's inner mental state and inner world, right? Because we see it and we hear it all the time. And we'll listen for that when we watch video. And then, parents who can't promote or utilize communication for that negotiation to sort of take it to that level, but they're sort of responding in this sort of, at the procedural level, actually, without this ability to sort of mentalize experience or to use communication effectively. I do want to share with you this tree. How many of you have seen this before? Yay, okay. The tree really represents attachment and exploration, and it really describes the critical function of attachment early in life. And so what we say is that children's needs really can be understood along this tree. On the one hand, there are times when kids are feeling comfortable and good in the world, and they can go off and they can explore. And this is time when they're playing, they're learning, they're engaging in the world. And we say that this is a time that they are branching out, right? And they can really branch out and grow and thrive when they're in explore mode, only if at those times when they are feeling vulnerable and hurt and worried, scared, needing some kind of reassurance, only if they have someone who they can also connect with, right, in those moments. So kids' needs are always on this sort of balance between exploration and connection. In our terms, it is exploration or attachment, but often we find that parents, the word attachment has funny meanings for parents. It's either too academic, or now it has all these associations with attachment parenting, which may or may not fit the situation. So I think that often talking about the need for connection works better for families. When kids are in explore mode or connect mode, they have needs from their parent. And when they're in explore mode, what they need is a secure base. And this is what the parents provide so that the child can feel safe to branch out and explore. When they are feeling vulnerable or hurt, worried, and they need the connection, what they need is a safe haven. I wanted to sort of take a moment and ask you to tell me, what does the phrase secure base mean to you? Okay, so Mom, could people hear? You'll have to speak up because I think it's all right. So I think if I paraphrase that Mom's here and that it's okay to explore, I'll be here when you come back. Other things, just think about, don't be academic about this for a minute. Just think about the words. Why did someone choose the words secure base? Safe, open and available. Exactly, right. So this sense of security that comes from knowing I can take this, I'm strong enough, I'll be here, I'm here, and I can sort of take whatever it is that you're going to need as you go off into the world. So you know that you've got the secure base here. It's interesting, I do a lot of work now with military families, which really opened my eyes to the words base and secure. From a military perspective, it's a place that you go back to and where you are safe, where you actually are secure, right? And that's an interesting sort of shift, but it's really important, I think. These words just roll off our tongue, right? Because we use them all the time, but they actually have meaning. The base is also holding the branches, right? It's got to be strong enough to hold the branches. It's got to be thick enough and strong enough to hold them so that the branches don't fall off, they don't crack and break, right? A secure base holds that and keeps it feeling secure so that it's okay to go off and explore. How about safe haven? What does that mean? Yeah, accepting, open, ready to give whatever the baby needs. What else? What does it mean to you? Sheltered, protected. Other things? Warm. Feelings of safety and a feeling of haven, right? I say this because, you know what? Parents can use this. This is a really useful model for parents to think about. When you're talking about linking to, the early foundation slide, those later outcomes, you can start to use a metaphor of a tree. And this notion of how do you build those roots? By providing a safe haven when the child needs to connect, by being a secure base when the child needs to explore, and then I was like, where'd they go? How do you do that? And I think you guys have already said several of these things. A parent provides a secure base by enjoying time with their child when they are exploring, by helping their child when the child needs help, and by attending to the child, right? There's a safety function, there's an attention function, and there's also I am still here. So branching out does not mean child doesn't need me. But I see so many heads going, no, right? But you're probably doing that because you know so many parents who actually think I just want them to be independent, right? Branching out is not child doesn't need me. Branching out is child does need me to be a secure base, and this is how I can be a secure base. And how do I provide a safe haven? by welcoming the child's need for connection through providing nurturance, by helping the child restore his or her balance when he or she is upset. Yeah. So it's really an important function to help the child. It's not be happy all the time, right? Restore balance is a dynamic process. It's okay to have distress arousal, but I'm also going to help you to get back into that state of regulation, right? So helping my child restore his or her balance is really about engaging in that process together of co-regulation. And then repairing disruptions when they occur. Repair the disruption. So if something happens that we are not in sync with one another, I am going to do what I need to set that right, or to help you, in moments where you're really feeling overwhelmed and distressed, not just to restore your balance, but also to understand what happened, or to show empathy for what you're feeling, and to maybe help you find a new way to deal with what it is that you're faced with. And I'm going to engage in that together, right? Repairing the disruption. So nurturance, restoring balance, and repairing the disruption. It's not abstract. It's a living metaphor, literally. And so there are ways that you can extend it that I think are really powerful and good. So for example, and some of these have come from participants in trainings over time as we've been sort of developing this notion of the tree and how we're using it in Mom Power. And we've had people come up with drawings of trees that were sort of tattered and bare, and under it said, "Trees can survive storms." And then we add to that, because that's true, but only when they get the nurturance and the extra nurturance they need to help their roots stay strong, right? So really it's about strengthening the roots in order to survive when sort of the winds are strong. The other thing is that what do trees do when they are in a harsh climate, right? What do? They make the roots grow down farther. Do they flower, bloom? They go dormant sometimes, right? And what that means is that they're putting all of their energy into their root needs, right? And they're not going to explore as much. And that's actually true, isn't it? What do kids do at times where there's a real struggle, a harsh climate? They can't effectively grow, thrive, branch out, right? They really need to build those secure roots. Trees can be transplanted, but they need a lot of nurturance in order to be successful in that new environment, right? Being transplanted is a harsh change for a tree. A lot of them don't make it. Yeah, you could apply it to adoption or foster care, right? So you can see lots of ways that you can use the tree to sort of think about these concepts, and parents really get that. Sometimes I talk with parents, we don't always do this, but we talk about the rings of the tree. It's sort of like the outer part is the parent holding it strong, and the inner part as the child grows. It's sort of the rings that, are the child's increasing ability to self-regulate. Someone told me, that's why we actually dropped some of that from the tree metaphor, that actually technically trees grow from the outside rings, like it's not from the inside out. So I was like, oh well, okay. Not everyone has to worry about the literalness of that. And then the final thing about the tree that I didn't tell you before is that you see there's something behind the tree. What is that? It's a sun. Trees need sun, and sun represents the warmth, the joy, the delight, that warms both the branching out and the roots, is a critical part for the tree's survival. And so the sun is a critical part, the joy, the warmth, the delight, a really important part of what helps a tree to grow and thrive. So that's our metaphor. Other things that people would add? If you think of things. The whole environment impacts the tree, right? It's not just the roots and the branches, but the whole environment, the whole ecosystem is really critical. And the other thing is that not all trees look alike. There are so many different kinds of trees, and actually one of the exercises we do in our Strong Families or Mom Power groups is we ask parents to find their favorite tree and to come in and to talk about why it's their favorite tree. And this is always so interesting because as they describe the qualities in the tree, it's often very meaningful, what it is that stands out to them. You know, I think of a mom who drew a picture of a weeping willow. And, you know, someone said to her, well, it's so sad. And she said, well, I think it's strong. And I think it's peaceful and calm. And it was such an important dynamic for her, actually, that very issue. So it became this really interesting thing. Or a dad who had been deployed in Iraq and came back, and he drew a Michigan white pine. And he had a story about how when he came back, when he first saw a tree, he cried, and he lay down under this Michigan pine, and he picked up a pine cone, and he put it in his mouth, and he bit it, he ate it. And the other people in the group were like, why'd you do that? And he said, it was like, I just had to find the most intense way I could to feel it. I had to eat it, taste it, to know this tree. I mean, trees are really meaningful to people. And the wonderful thing about it, too, is that once you've got people thinking about trees this way, they see them everywhere. And it becomes a reminder. And you can get people thinking about that as a way to connect back. Some people don't know that however far out a tree branches on the top part, it has to have equal support on the bottom part, right? And so you may not know this, but trees are as big down as they are up. This is a truth, right, about their root system. So people start imagining, I've had parents say to me, I never used to think about the roots, but now I see trees and I'm always thinking about the roots. It's like, great, that's exactly what we want you to do. So, okay. Shifting gears just a tiny bit. Structuring observations. Here we are talking about assessing attachment in the home, and I'm talking about structuring observations. Why am I doing that? Because I think one of the things that I want to convey to you is that understanding attachment really means being able to attend to both explore and connect, right? So you want to look, and oftentimes these things just happen. And so the structure of the observation is that you observe. You just observe what's happening. If you think about the strange situation, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, what is it? It's just a way of creating opportunities to see, explore, and connect, and to see how the parent functions as a secure base and a safe haven. That's all it is, right? And so when you're looking at observations in everyday life, you want to be attending both to the moments where the child might be feeling safe, or you would expect the child to be feeling safe in the presence of the caregiver, or times of distress, things that are hard that might come up that activate the attachment system. We'll say more about that. Sometimes it's helpful to actually create opportunities for that and to structure it, and maybe even in the home to videotape it and watch it with the parent. And Julie will talk more about that later, so I won't go into that, but only to say that one of the things that we have found in our own work, and so we do this pretty much across the board, is, you know, free play and just time together, feeding, diaper changing, natural everyday activities are really important to see and to not interfere with and to be present with. But also it can be very powerful to create opportunities that are more challenging to introduce tasks. So there's a procedure called the Kroll procedure, which you'll see some of our home tapes utilize. And you can videotape this. If you have an iPhone or a phone, you can videotape. Watching sort of how it goes when things are easier, watching how it goes when things are harder or more challenging, sometimes gives you really different information. And parents can reflect on that too. So we often do a series of different kinds of tasks. For example, with the toddler, there's nothing like cleanup time, right? To generate some interesting information about how the dyad negotiates around issues of autonomy, control, directives, discipline, whatever it is that the parent is sort of thinking about that, right? And how the child engages in that process. It can be very interesting, the co-regulation around cleanup. When we're looking at infant attachment, as I said, often what we're looking at is the procedural level assessment. And I'm going to spend a minute going really fast through a review of procedural level of sort of describing attachment because I'm pretty sure y'all are familiar with it, but I just want to say it as a sort of foundation and a way of thinking about it, and then watch some tapes. So essentially, for the infant side or the toddler side, what we're looking at is this strategy that balances exploration and proximity. In times of distress, how do they use the caregiver as a as a safe haven? In times of exploration, can they use the parent as a secure base? There are three main types: the avoidant, the secure, and the ambivalent resistant. And then there's also the disorganized type. And it's important to note that when a child is disorganized, we also look to see what is the other sort of classification that would be a best fitting classification. And why we do that will become clear as I go on. In the home, what are the kinds of things that might naturally occur that would elicit or activate the attachment system? This is straight from Ainsworth, thanks to Julie Robato, who is amazing at reading and rereading source material. And it's like, you know what? Bowlby already said that. I'm like, great, yay. That's cool. But this is straight from Ainsworth and speaks to what is it that essentially elicits attachment behavior. And this can be things like departing or returning, which happens all the time, doesn't it? You leave the room, or you're emotionally unavailable because you pick up the phone. How many of you have experienced that? You know, totally peaceful, happy, calm, playing child, and then you pick up the phone and you start talking on the phone, and it's like signaling behavior, right? Signal, signal. That's a kind of departure as well. Moments where there's a rebuff or a lack of responsiveness, actually on the part of either partner, and how do they respond to that? Alarming events, so unfamiliar people or situations, illness, hunger, pain, cold, being alone, and what terminates it? Things like being picked up, proximity, right? It would be fun actually to show that one clip. Are you confident about finding the start time if we fast forward the? Do you know which one I'm? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it'd be fun to show. Would you be willing to help find the moment? I have the video on here. Julie has the timing for this one down, and I'm thinking, yeah, I will have to. Nope, not that. Okay. Okay, so I just want to make sure. 45, 41, I know. Okay, here's this one. If you want to fast forward. So this is a home visit. This is one of our participants in our Mom Power study. And this is just segments that are taken from the Kroll.
Look at this. Can I have this one?
Okay,
Look at this.
right there.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, and so let's watch this together, and keeping in mind some of the things that we just shared about what activates attachment in the home, and keep an eye here.
Mama. Yeah. Let's look at this. Watch this. Mama. Here, you have to turn it. Turn it. Turn it. I'm sorry. Okay, here we have to turn this one. Turn it. Yeah. Mama. Yeah. This way. This way. Oh, hold on. No, it'll open. Here. Let's try it. Yeah. Mama. I know Mama's scared of it too.
Okay, what did you see? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mom accepted and said, yeah, me too, and validated the fear.
Yeah, so the communication, right, on both levels, so the behavioral and the sort of verbal levels, this validation and recognition of the child's distress, right? The sort of welcoming of it, actually, right? Yeah. She was scared of it too. Did you feel, tell me about that. Say a little bit more about Mom saying she was afraid of it too. Yeah? Yeah, right. I mean, how many of you sort of sat with a little bit of sort of, okay, what's going to happen here, right? I mean, that's part of the fun, but also the scary part of a Jack in the Box, right? It's going to pop up, and we know like when it's going to, more or less, but it's still this sort of, it did it, right? But, so she also did have that. Did she seem scared to you? Like really fearful, scared? Why not? Yeah, she knew what to expect. She'd already done it. You know, I think what she does in this moment is really quite beautiful, because what she does is she acknowledges and validates the feeling, and she shares the feeling, but she does it in a way that is not overwhelming for the child, right? That is okay. It's okay to be scared. It's okay. You know, I'm not totally undone by this. You're okay. But I get that you're actually really a little bit upset about this. So come, you know, I'm going to laugh because there's a funny part to this. But it's not a rejecting laugh. It's a, okay, you can come to me. And actually what I do is I lean in and I give you a kiss, right? So I welcome you right into my lap and into my safe haven. Right? So right there, that was, uh-huh.
Started earlier when the baby was going very, very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've done this before, I know at some point there's something popping out of your skin. And the mom takes the hand and it's like, all right, let's get there, keep going.
Right. So where is that on the tree, if you sort of think about that moment? Where? Exploration, yeah, and the mom is right there with, you know, I'm your secure base, we can do this together, I can help you. I think that's a really lovely point. I can help, I'm attending in some way, I'm involved, right? Is involved. And I can enjoy it with you, and I'm right here, right? And then, boom, scary. Okay, come. And the baby sends a clear signal about what the baby needs, right? This little one is not sending confusing signals, right? Do you think the baby's sending confusing signals? Does anyone disagree with me? No. I think the baby sends a very clear signal of, I need to be in your lap right now. That's proximity seeking. I need to be right next to you. And mom welcomes. And then she acknowledges verbally the feeling in a way that contains it, that doesn't just mirror it, but actually contains it. And this is critical, because that's one of the things that we really want parents to be able to do, to mirror, but in a marked or digested sort of way, a way that transforms it, that's not the pure mirroring of the affect, but that is transforming it a little bit to make it tolerable. And it happens all the time. Baby cries, and, you know, dad picks up baby and says, "Aw," right? And that's distress, concern, but it's a little bit different, which is really different than baby's really anxious and distressed, and mom says, "What do I do? I don't know what to do." Okay, why won't you stop crying? I'm so anxious, right? I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Nothing's working. Nothing's working. That's an undigested, untransformed mirroring of the anxiety, and that's a very different thing. Mom was not scared here in a way that was scary for the baby. So it's really powerful, right? And that's just a moment. You see that sort of thing all the time. That's assessing attachment in the home, right? That's what it's all about. These moments. Thanks, Julie. I didn't trust that I was going to remember which segment it happened in, so. It's thinking about it. I wonder why it's not showing. Yeah, good idea. Okay. Let's try again. All right, thank you, whoever said try hitting escape. Distress, arousal, regulation, see? Happens all the time. And that was also true for that mom, right? In that moment, that's what she did with that little one too. Another moment of distress, arousal, go-to person, regulated. Can go back to exploring and playing with the Jack in the Box because it can actually be transformed into something fun now. All right.
It was neat too because based on their relationship, you knew exactly where to go.
So did everyone hear? It was neat because based on their relationship, this little one knew exactly where to go. And that's so true. It was not thought about. It was not, this is scary, what should I do now, right? It was just action. And that's procedural level knowledge. That is the core of that middle level, the implicit template. If I'm distressed, I have a go-to person I can go to, right? And that's okay. So that's what she does. All right, so just to sort of underscore these three main types, and I like to frame them as emotion regulation strategies, and so that's why I'm going to walk you through it, even though I know you all know what secure attachment is. But basically, the idea is that secure attachment is evident when you see that the child can explore in the caregiver's presence, that they can do things like, for example, be affiliative with you, a new person, but more comfortably when the caregiver is there, right? That if they're distressed, they seek and maintain contact with the caregiver. We just saw that. If they're not distressed, they actually can engage in interaction with the parent. Maybe if the parent stepped out, that they greet and welcome the parent coming back into the room, that they look to initiate interaction after they have become distressed, right? Instead of turning away or shutting down. They're consolable by their attachment figure, and they can use the parent as a secure base. So underlying that at its core, I think, are some important messages. And the message that the child is getting through these experiences is, it's okay to show my emotions. I can have distressing emotions, I can have happy emotions, and both of those are going to be acknowledged and welcomed. So I can communicate them openly and comfortably. Just think about how important that is through your whole lifespan and how hard it is for so many to feel like it's okay to be with your distress emotions or to be okay with your close positive emotions or intimacy feelings or whatever sorts of feelings. But that capacity to freely experience and express is at the core of a secure attachment. In contrast, when we think about the avoidant type, what we're seeing is somewhat more independence in the exploration, so less sort of clear using the parent as a secure base from which to branch out and explore, and less affective sharing. They may be more affiliative to you when you come in than you might expect or anticipate. Even when the caregiver is absent. They may show less distress when the parent leaves, or less distress directed towards the caregiver when they are upset about something. So thinking about the Jack in the Box example, maybe, instead of jumping into mom's lap, sort of, clearly distressed, but then sort of turning away, and I'm going to deal with this on my own, right? Avoiding contact with the parent, and often very object-focused play. Oftentimes what you'll see is that there's a lot of focus on engaging the caregiver, but through shared attention to a toy instead of shared attention to one another, right? And so when you see that as a sort of consistent pattern, what we see is an emotion regulation strategy that is a deactivation of affect, all right? And this is in contrast to the ambivalent resistance style, where typically what we see is more poverty of exploration. So a tendency to be closer to caregiver, less explorative, less branching out. The world seems dangerous. There's more distress expressed during separations or scary events, so things that sort of activate attachment. There's an inability, however, to be consoled fully by the attachment figure. And this is interesting in terms of what that distress arousal sequence is like, because you're not seeing that sort of regulation. And often what we see is this sort of oscillating between seeking comfort and failing to be comforted by that caregiver, right? So I want you to comfort me, but I can't quite be comforted or soothed. We're going to see examples of things in a little while, so just stay with me. These things it doesn't really matter, the classification. And you know what? If I were in a home visit, I would have a hard time often being totally confident, oh, this is an A, and this is a B, and this is a C, right? And that's not the critical thing. I think the critical thing is really gaining an appreciation for that dance, for thinking about the emotion regulation strategies that child is demonstrating, that the parent is demonstrating, and knowing that anyways, even in the research world, these things are on a continuum. And not all, oftentimes when we're teaching, we sort of show the example that's like perfect avoidance. Mom walks in the room, the child turns away, and you're like, all right, anyone could see that, right? How often does it look that clear in real life? Sometimes, but often it's a lot more complicated. There's a little of this and there's a little of that, and you're trying to sort of make sense of it, and you're looking for patterns. I find it much more helpful to think about the emotion regulation strategies than any kind of category. When they are distressed, how are they using the caregiver? What does this look like in terms of the parent's capacity to be a secure base or a safe haven? What does this look like in terms of the child's ability to explore or show needs for connection? Are the signals that the baby's sending clear, or are they confusing? And when they're confusing, parents have a lot more work to do, don't they, right? Because they have to figure it out. And it's much harder to do that, especially in moments of distress, right, where the stakes feel high and everyone's a little bit overwhelmed. We know tons of data on links between parenting and child attachment, but the reason I put this in here is I think it's important to note, although we think about all this research data as like being in the laboratory, actually Ainsworth developed all of this on the basis of home observations. So it's very important to know that, the whole sensitivity focus that is in the literature that we all learn about was based on many, many, many hours of watching what happens in the home. And on the basis of those home observations, what she identified as 3 core domains that were really important were sensitivity, responsivity, and consistency. And basically found that when kids were secure, they were more likely to have parents who were more highly sensitive, highly responsive, and consistently so. Keeping in mind that interactive repair is still important. You're never perfect. You shouldn't be. Avoidant attachment was sort of associated with patterns of low parenting sensitivity, so rejection. Oftentimes, for example, when I think about parents who have kids who are avoidant, what comes to mind are things that are sort of more derogating, sort of sarcasm. Oh, he's so spoiled, right? That's the verbal level, the representational level, if you will, of an avoidant, dismissing sort of attachment style. It's a deactivating of affect. I'm not getting into his feelings, and I'm not really talking about my feelings. I just have this cool sort of rejection, right? That's one way that it can look. Oftentimes, these parents are less responsive, so they're more under-involved. They're not responding as much. But the consistency of that is pretty high. So the child knows what to expect, right? And that is important because that means the child can develop a strategy to cope with it. The dance is there, and the child can learn the steps and know what to do in order to maintain proximity, right? Which is, don't show emotions too much, because then I'll be rejected. But if I don't show them too much, then I can stay close and we get our needs met. In terms of ambivalent styles, what we see is that there's just a lot of variability. So sometimes these parents will look very sensitive, and sometimes they will look very insensitive and intrusive and overwhelming, for example. And this kind of shifting means that there's a very low level of consistency in the style. So the baby might not know what he or she is going to get. So the responsivity is somewhat also unpredictable. It's variable. It's interesting to note that a lot of parents who have other concerns that are preoccupying them fall into this category and have kids who fall into this category. So if they're having a lot of anxiety, distress, depression symptoms, and they're reporting that, they may be more likely to sort of have kids who fall into this category. And if you think about a parent who's sort of preoccupied with other concerns, if you're the baby and you want to stay close, what do you need to do? Ramp it up, right? It's like, I need you to pay attention to me. I need you to be aware of my needs, and so I'm going to keep my needs front and center. So when you think about that, you know, trying to be comforted but failing to be comforted pattern, it's a pretty effective strategy, isn't it, for keeping a parent close who might otherwise be preoccupied, distracted by other concerns or needs or not so available. Okay. And then there's the disorganized type. And just some examples. I mean, whole trainings could be done on each of these things, right? So I'm not trying to do justice. But you're going to see and hear about a lot about this afternoon, some of which I will anticipate for you is hard to see. And I know Julie will take good care of you through that process of watching and sitting with it, because it's hard. But typically around disorganization, what we're seeing is a strategy that reflects no very good strategy. So it's a child who, in times of distress, really doesn't have a way to maintain proximity and reduce distress, because potentially the person who is the source of safety, that safe haven, is also the source of threat, right? And that's a very fundamental dilemma to be in. And so often with kids who have disorganized type of attachment, what we'll see are things that sort of are anomalous. Like when something scary happens, instead of going to the parent, they show just fright, right? And they're not comforted, or they might look dissociated. When they show sort of inconsistent or incompatible responses. For example, they seem fine when the caregiver is gone and then get distressed when the caregiver is back. This doesn't really make sense from an attachment perspective, right? And that kind of incompatibility is something that we often see, or even showing sort of two incompatible things, like something scary happens, and so I back into mom. I'm getting close to her, but I'm not looking in her direction, right? So it's sort of either simultaneous or sequential displays of inconsistent behaviors. Everyone with me about that? Okay. Oftentimes with kids, what we'll see is extreme or dysregulated responses that aren't explained by developmental status or neurodevelopmental level, and are evident in the interactions with the caregivers. And for that, I think about kids who we see where, you know, mom steps in to play and suddenly the child is falling all over everything, right? And you're like, oh, this child was pretty coordinated in play a minute ago and now is sort of really showing all this discoordination in interaction. And also kids who maybe are extremely inhibited, or who are, on the sort of flip side, highly active, aggressive, not fearing for their safety appropriately. We had a child in our clinic the other day who literally ran out the door, ran to the lobby, and started to climb over this like railing that leads to sort of a drop. I mean, it was like so fast like this, and all of us are like running out there to like capture him, but this sort of putting himself in harm's way over and over again was something. He was also climbing on the backs of chairs, and I'm sure you've all seen this, right? It's the kids who are not sort of showing that capacity for regulation in some ways, right? So no coherent strategy. And I already said what underlies that: competing motives, when the source of safety may also be the source of fear and threat, or a lack of a strategy for coping with distress. And I want to say it's not always because it's the caregiver who is, for example, doing the scary things, right? It might be that the caregiver is not able to protect in ways that the baby would expect or need from a caregiver. And when parents or caregivers look really fearful or scared or distressed, that's really scary for babies. Fear is a very primitive emotion. It's very necessary. It's hardwired in our brains. We have areas of our brain that, you know, light up very quickly when we experience something that sort of triggers fear reactions. We're very attuned to fearful faces, We process them differently biologically, and it's distressing to us, right? So if a baby has the experience of seeing a parent who is scared, that is actually very dysregulating for a child. So this means this person is also not the safe place, because if she looks scared, then there must be something still scary. So if you think about domestic violence, for example, I think this helps to explain why sometimes the data are showing us that kids who witness domestic violence have just as troublesome outcomes or challenges as those who maybe have experienced physical maltreatment themselves, right? Which seems sort of paradoxical or anomalous to folks who don't understand how attuned kids are to those safety needs and to fear expressions and the need for a caregiver who is safe. Okay, questions, comments, thoughts? All right. I'm going to move us away from, I just covered, what we just talked about was the infant and the procedural level, sort of infant attachment classifications, right? And so shifting a little bit now to thinking about attachment at the level of representation. I think for those of us in Michigan, we often think about our maternal figure, Selma Freiberg, and the angels and the ghosts in the nursery. Alicia Lieberman for the angels, Selma for the ghosts. And this really speaks to the representational level of the baby and relationships. The way that I think is sort of best to think about this with parents is to talk about the music in the background. The music that is playing when you are interacting with your child and how this affects how it feels to be with in the moment, right? It's a very powerful metaphor, just like with the tree. Just raise your hand if you've seen this. Okay, about maybe a half of you. So I want to invite you to just experience this with me, to watch, to observe, to just take note of what it's like to be in this place, watching this scene, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, that's interesting. Let's see. I wonder if there's something about how it's being translated. Yeah, okay, if I put the audio thing on, it doesn't work. So let's see if I can just hold the mic to it. Let's see if this works. Okay. So reactions, what was that like? Everyone should feel free to answer. What was that like? Optimistic. In what way? Yeah. Yeah, so a fun time, sunny day at the beach. Yeah. Very peaceful. Feelings of wanting to explore what's down the path. Did other people feel that way? Wanting to know what's coming ahead? Mm-hmm. What else? Mm-hmm. So the music, you were really aware of that, like what that felt like. Yeah. What else? Did anyone notice any changes in their body? Relaxed. Where did you feel it? Shoulders. It's true for me, I have to say, every time. And I know the music is coming, but I hear it and I'm like, ah. And my breathing changes too. I don't know if anyone else felt that. I certainly feel it in the room a little bit afterwards. Any other thoughts about this? Associations, did it remind you of anywhere nice? Bring back nice memories? Sometimes people will say, oh yeah, it reminds me of my honeymoon, or it reminds me of this or that, you know. It's nice. And then people say, oh, it must be the Michigan coast, or it must be the California coast, or, yep. So, okay. I want you to now watch another clip, and again, to just be open to the experience, and we'll talk about it again after, and I'll hold the clip again. Okay. So, what was that like? You were so prescient. You like thought ahead to where this was going. Had you seen it before? Or was this a first? Yeah. Yeah, so what was it like seeing the second one? Very different. How so? That very first note was like, turn it off already. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just kind of struck by how the music makes me, when the leaves are blowing, and the calm one is very soothing, but when you watch like the scary music, my mind perceives like, oh, something's there. Like,
Yeah.
I see the same things.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because I have a question. How many thought it was the same video? How many are not totally sure it was the same video? Okay. Sometimes people think it must be different because when they watch it, just like you said, the leaves look different. It's shakier the second time, people will say. It doesn't look the same. I don't think it's the same video. So that the water looks rougher, right? So the background music actually literally changes the way that you see the exact same thing. And it can really look different, right? Depending on what music is playing in the background.
In the first video, it feels like, I mean, the first time with the more pleasant music, it's like you're seeing it through the eyes of the person taking a hike or walking, and you feel like you're seeing it through their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're looking through the eyes of the stalker.
Right. So it's sort of like the threat or the danger is what's really imminent. So you can't enjoy it because there's a clear danger or threat there, and you're sort of seeing it through the eyes of danger, harm, something bad's going to happen. Did you have something you wanted to say? Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. Wow. Yeah, so see, the music in the background is, it's playing and it impacts us very, very early. So absolutely, the environment makes a difference, and his environment got a little less pleasant, so I'm sorry about that for a moment. But, uh-huh. So you think that, And this is also a really interesting point. It goes back to the how many times you can see and experience these things and still see and experience. But again, I want to sort of bring you back to tools This is available for purchase. If you go to the Circle of Security website, you can buy it. It's like $25. You could make your own if you're that tech savvy. I'm not. But I don't want to echo like that. Better? Okay. But, you know, this is an incredibly powerful way to talk with families about the power of representation and how it shapes what we see, what we experience, how we experience it, and that two people seeing the same thing may have totally different perceptions and reactions to it, right? And this is such an important point. When we think about the families that we serve, you know, there's such high prevalence of trauma, for example. And trauma is a very powerful background music. It leads us to perceive things as more dangerous. The world isn't safe. It leads us to perceive threat where someone else might say, it's just a nice, beautiful path to the ocean. It's lovely, it's relaxing. It changes our physiology. Our bodies respond differently. You know, we're tense as opposed to relaxed. Our breathing changes, our cortisol changes, you know, and it's so powerful and yet so often invisible to people that this is happening for them. And so sharing with them a metaphor like this can be really a very powerful way of saying, when you experience X, you have different music. I wonder if you have different music playing. What was the music for you? What do you think the music was for your little ones? This can be a very, very powerful tool. Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow. That's, yeah. The power, music is really powerful, and I think that's why this metaphor works so well, because it does affect us. I mean, I think just as you were saying, Danielle, just it's at like at every level, and it's unconscious, and we don't control it. It sort of just gets into our core, and it really does have that impact. And the same is true with certain experiences. So with trauma or with joy and delight and comfort that we experience when we are in connection, if we're lucky enough to be sort of in environments that are secure and safe, then we often do hear this very beautiful music playing, right? But if, you know, you are in a different situation, your child coming to you with needs may not bring up Pachelbel's canon. It may bring up shark music, right? And there's not a single truth to this. It's about understanding what that background music is and knowing that you can do two things. One, sometimes you can play different music, but certainly it's not always possible. Certain experiences, you know, engender certain music playing in the background pretty powerfully, but you can learn to turn down the volume, right? And you can also learn that just because that music is playing doesn't mean that you have to respond to it as dangerous, right? So you can interrupt that connection. I like to think of the background music notion as a really good metaphor for thinking about representations in general as well, because representations are the sort of unconscious guide of how we process relational information. So when we think about the adult attachment interview, it's sort of tapping into our memory templates of, does it feel safe in relationships or does it feel dangerous? If someone has a need, does it feel safe to meet that need or does it feel dangerous to meet that need? If someone's, you know, angry or scared, is that okay? Can I handle that, or is it going to be really dysregulating? Think about the mom with the Jack in the Box, right? For her, this little one had a need, this little one was scared, and it was okay. It didn't, you know, there wasn't shark music playing that made it hard to sort of meet her little one's need. It's funny because I realized during the break I was going to bring in my plug so that I would plug it in. So while the shark music was playing, I looked and I saw that the battery power was low, and I thought, "There's my shark music." But I think we're good. I don't think it'll stop before we're at our break. I want to go back to the slides and share a little bit with you about assessing representations. And I have a handout for you, which maybe I can start sending around. Is it over with you? Is it with me? Oh, it's right here. Thanks. Why don't I give half to each of you? Great. Okay. Oh, can I have one? Oh, great. Thanks. Although, yeah, it's the right size. Cool. Leave it to Julie to solve shark music. See, she's really good. Oh, except I need the other part to this. Oh, here it is. Got it. You're smart. All right. Huh? I won't. Promise. That would be shark music for you. Got it. All right. So what I've distributed is actually sample questions from the AAI and from the working model of the child. And I share these with you not because I think you're going to do formal interviews with families, but simply because I think, when we talk about doing things in the home, I think everything that you're talking with the parent about is a chance, an opportunity to tap into the representation of the parent about parenting, about their child. But there are some questions that are just very powerful at eliciting material that can be really useful for thinking about this. So I share these with you. When we look at the research literature, there's sort of two main areas where we often think about tapping into representations. And one is the representation of the parent's own experiences growing up in his or her family of origin. And the AAI is very powerful for that purpose. And then also of parenting and their child. So the representation of what it feels like to be a parent and of this child. And there I like to use, there are several interviews, but the working model of the child interview is a very powerful one that's also publicly available, so you can use it and you can have it. So I'm going to share a little bit more about this with you. This is an interview that's designed to tap into the parent's representation of their child's personality and their relationship with their child. And from it, you can derive three main typologies: a balanced type that corresponds to security, a disengaged type that corresponds to avoidance, and a distorted type that corresponds to an ambivalent resistant sort of style. I'm not going to get into the formal classifications of representations right now, because the truth is when you're in the home, you're not going to do that anyways. You're not going to audio record it, transcribe it, look for disfluencies in subtle ways and coherence. Some of you have been in workshops, I know, where we've done that and we've practiced it, and it's really a great thing to do because it tunes you in special ways to those kinds of things. But I do want to talk about what are some of the things that can be elicited from these kinds of questions that can be really helpul in understanding the attachment style and pattern of the parent in the relationship. So just some examples of questions. You have many more in your handout, but asking parents to give you 5 words or phrases that describe their child's personality, and then asking them, well, why did you choose that one? And can you give me an example that would illustrate it, is really, really powerful. Interestingly, I had a parent just recently in our clinic who, it was really fascinating. We asked for 3 because of the constraints of our time, and she gave 3, and then she emailed me that evening, and she said, I want to change my answer. I was thinking about it, and I didn't really think this, if I had to only pick 3, this wasn't the top 3. I shouldn't have chosen this word. But it speaks to how powerful that was for her, right? In really trying to pull together the 3 things that would really characterize her child's personality. And when we ask them to sort of tell us why they chose it and to give examples, we're tapping into different memory systems. We're tapping into the sort of general memory. It's called semantic memory, the why did you choose it, and we're tapping into episodic memory, right? Give me a specific time, and can you describe that to me? And why do we do this? Because it helps us to think about their emotion regulation strategy. Can they really freely describe, openly and communicate a range of different feelings or experiences that the child might have or characteristics of their personality? And can they back it up with evidence in a way that convinces us that this is real life that they're talking about, right? What do you think? Why does he do it? What will happen as he gets older? Who does your child remind you of? Incredibly powerful. Did you hope he would turn out to be similar or different to yourself, to his other parent, to your parents? And you get information about that. It's incredibly powerful. Tell me a favorite story about your child. How did you choose your child's name? all of those questions that you're using all the time anyways are just so powerful for tapping into that, attachment representational style. And the kinds of things that you get from it are how richly can the parent describe the child? Is there a sense of the parent really knowing this child as an individual? Sometimes we call this richness of perceptions. I really know this person. On the lower side of that, what we have are parents who often can't say a whole lot. It's not very elaborated. There's not a lot of detail. There may be a lot of I don't knows or very stereotyped descriptions that don't really convince you that they're talking about this one child as a person. We can get a picture of caregiving sensitivity. So does the parent acknowledge and respond to the child as having needs, right? So emotional needs, physical needs, biological needs, and is the parent describing themselves as responding to that? And on the lower end, are they describing more insensitive behavior or being unaware of or unresponsive to or indifferent to the child's inner needs? So we'll get to an example. Helplessness. I think this is perhaps one of the most important. If I had to pick my two most important sort of worrisome indicators, this would definitely hit the top two. Helplessness is very powerful. When parents feel helpless, it's very powerful because it really undermines their capacity to meet their child's needs in a way that leads to the child feeling safe, secure, and held. And a lot of parents that we work with, because one of the major things that trauma does is it leaves you feeling helpless and powerless to protect yourself. So when a parent perceives themselves as helpless, vulnerable, uncertain, overwhelmed, this is very concerning. Sometimes they may describe the infant as being powerful, and they're sort of the powerless one. At the lower end, you have parents who feel efficacious. Does this mean that they always know what to do? No. But it means that they convey a sense of, I can try and figure this out, right? I can meet my child's needs, and if I don't know what he needs, I can try and figure it out. Even if that means utilizing other resources or supports, that's an efficacious approach. You might have challenges, but they don't threaten your sense of, I can be competent to meet my child's needs. Acceptance of the infant, which is to say, is there a sense that whatever the infant needs or brings, I am willing to accept, right? And it's very convincing that a parent is very accepting when they describe a challenging thing and they accept it, right? Like a parent who says, oh, he's saying no all the time now. He's just like saying no all the time, but that's all right. I know he's gonna, grow out of this and he's just figuring himself out right now, right? That's very powerful because it's a non-rejection of something that might be challenging for the parent, right? Or he throws his food off the high chair all the time, but my daughter did that too. I know it'll pass. That's accepting. I'm not getting angry, harsh, rejecting around something that's challenging. Looking just at the affective tone of the representation, is there joy? Is there anger? Is there anxiety? Is there indifference? This is very concerning. A sense of I don't care, right? In a group that I ran not too long ago, there was a dad who described a time when his child got hurt. And basically he said, well, he just has to, that's life. You have to figure out how to deal with that, right? And his idea was it toughens you up, right? And this was a dad who had been toughened up in pretty harsh ways himself. But that indifference to the child's experience of vulnerability and pain is really concerning, right? Sadness, guilt, or irrational fears for safety. And then the second big hitter. So I said helplessness was the one of the two. I would say the two of the two is reflective functioning, the capacity to be able to take another's perspective and to use an awareness of mental states to make behavior meaningful. That's very academic. So what does that mean? It means I can acknowledge feelings. I can have feelings. The feelings can be big. They can be contradictory. They can be positive and negative. And I know that it affects how I am in the moment. I can be aware of the shark music, for example, right, as something that's impacting me. And I also use my understanding that people have inner worlds to understand my baby, right? So I'm thinking about my baby's perspective and my baby's experience, and that helps me to make sense of why he or she behaves the way that he or she does. It's really important to note that reflective functioning is very powerfully associated with this ability to tolerate ambivalent or painful affect without having to minimize it, distort it, split it off, deny it, right? To be able to sit with the distress. Comes back again to distress, arousal, regulation, right? Doesn't it? That you can really tolerate that distress, that it's not overwhelming or scary. And it allows you to respond to the child's emotional needs with acceptance and with openness to what they're feeling. And it is what creates in the child the capacity to have that freely express and convey and communicate both positive and negative emotions. So when we put all these things together, there are the three representational types. The balanced type that is high reflective, richly sort of described, accepting, high levels of caregiving sensitivity. And I'll just share a little bit of a narrative with you. And it's, what's most difficult about Joy's behavior now for you to handle? There's not anything really too bad, but I guess waking up at night gets to be pretty hard. It's really hard because I'm kind of, so tired. And for a while he was sleeping through the night, but he's waking up at least once almost every night these days. It gets pretty exhausting. I think it's because he's teething. And how do you handle these situations? Well, I feel bad to see him hurting, so, even though I'm tired, I try to find some way to comfort him. He likes it when I hold him. Like last night he woke up, and I didn't want him to feel bad, that he woke me up. I want him to know that I'm there for him, So I just held him and talked to him. Anyways, I think it's just a phase. It'll get better. What do you notice there that makes it bounce? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's high acceptance. She's not rejecting or negative about it. And also she understands it as a phase that's related to something he's experiencing, like his pain, which is reflective functioning, right? I understand there's a sort of underlying experience related to this behavior. Anything else? I know there's like a ton here. Yeah. Pretty impressive, huh? Not always thinking about that at 3 o'clock in the morning. But she's using an awareness that this experience can have mental state consequences for him, that how she responds to him is going to relate to how he's then going to feel. That's reflective functioning in action. It's a very sort of complex, sophisticated aspect. Mm-hmm. Yep, right. So she's able to talk about feelings, including difficult ones, right? Like she is, it's hard. It's pretty exhausting. Right? So you definitely see she can talk about a range of feelings. This is in contrast to disengaged representations that are more deactivated. It's that minimizing of affect that we talked about, more cognitively driven, often low in richness, higher levels of resentment, lower acceptance. If anger is expressed, it's typically more cold anger, and indifference is very powerful. Sometimes this has implications for how it feels to talk to parents, because if a parent has a very dismissing, disengaging style, and you're there to support relationships, acknowledge feelings, like what do you think you're going to experience? Door open? Yeah, let's talk about that. Or maybe some rejection, some real quiet, maybe even making you feel bad or stupid or, this is dumb or you're not helping me or what is this about? I don't need to do this. Why are we going to bother, right? a lot of powerful feelings that you can start to have of, I don't want to go there, she doesn't like me, this isn't fun, I don't want to ask these questions, it's not going to work, right? All the sort of countertransferential feelings that you can have that get evoked because of this sort of lack of safety around feelings. And so a disengaged narrative might sound something like this. What about Joey's behavior now is the most difficult for you to handle? I don't know. I guess when he wakes up in the night. He's always making a fuss and waking you up. That's how he is. Can you give a specific example? I don't know. It's just always like that. He's always waking you up and whining and fussing. Like, you know, they just want your attention and that's all. Nothing's going to make them stop until you get up. Well, what do you do? Well, I don't want to spoil them, you know, so I don't get them every time. They have to know how to handle that. So why do you think he does it? That's how they are. They just want your attention. So what makes that disengaging? Yeah, there's really a lack of sort of thinking about the baby's perspective or experience here, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's nothing positive, and there's just no sense of acceptance, and there's no reflection about giving it a context, right? It's really just always like that. That's how they all are. And even at the level of language, you see how she uses this sort of distancing speech? It's not about her baby, but it's about how babies are in general. That's how they are. And right, it's not about feelings, it's about behaviors. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a lot more there, but in the interest, I want to show some video. Distorted representations tend to be the sort of flip side of that, very affectively driven, overactivated, wandering, incoherent narratives, run-on sentences. And that's because when you have that sort of affective regulation style of hyping up affect, you're sort of more likely to jump around from one story to the next, where there's a lot of strong feeling, right? And so we often see that they're overwhelmed by describing stories, and they have a difficult time putting it all together in a way that's coherent. They may have a mixture of high and low sensitivity, that unpredictability, and oftentimes we hear things like confusion, helplessness, role reversal, a lot of self-focus, so you're asking about the baby, but they keep bringing it back to talk about themselves, or distraction, so constantly focusing on some other topic. My sort of classic example about that was an interview that I did with someone who had basically broken up with the father of the baby, and the whole time when I did this interview, and I did the formal, you know, working model of the interview from beginning to end, and every question was not about the baby. Every question was about the idiot. So every story was, you know, well, the idiot did this and this and this, and you just can sort of see it's really hard to stay focused on the baby who's here, right? Because I'm so distracted by my her anger, rage over there. So an example of a distorted narrative, oh my goodness, what's most difficult? Oh my goodness, definitely when he's waking up at night and then he cries and he won't stop and I don't know what to do. It's like, you know, terrible. Like last night, you know, he just cried and cried and cried, and I was talking to him and saying, hush now, it's going to be okay, because he's like my little baby angel, you know, and I love to hold you, but you're breaking my heart with your crying, and I just didn't know what to do. And so then I made a bottle and fed him and rocked him and, you know, everything I could think of, but he was still so fussy. I felt so bad, you know. I mean, we try to make each other feel better. He's just my little angel, and I hate to see him suffer. It's terrible to deal with him when he's like that, you know, because now I'm so exhausted because he's keeping me up half the night, and I have to work the next day. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what to do. Okay, what stands out? I'm sorry? She's overwhelmed. Yeah, she can't regulate her own affect, right? Her affect is overwhelming to her. What else? I'm glad you picked up on that, because, you know, that's something that is sort of embedded in there, but is something that we'll hear a lot, for example, in our parent-infant program, and we have a lot of parents who come in who are struggling with postpartum depression, and you know, it's very interesting to me to hear the parents who talk about how their babies comfort them, or make them feel better, for example, right? The sort of role reversal implied is definitely a little bit concerning. Anything else? There's a lot there. There's actually, there's sort of ways that it's jumping around. It's hard to follow the thread. She's sort of talking to the baby, and then she's talking to the interviewer. It's confusing, but it's sort of at the core, the point is emotion is so overwhelming and so flooding, and I could be so distracted or overwhelmed by things that you could imagine that baby is going to have a hard time staying on mom's radar here, right? Baby's needs aren't what's necessarily being responded to. Mom's needs are pretty overwhelming. Okay, I'm going to show a video. We're going to talk a little bit more about these different types of styles in the home context. Oh, go here. I'm going to need to cue up again. Oh, X.
No thanks, listen.
All right, so again, this is another, oh, sorry, I didn't go far enough forward. I want to make sure I've got it queued up. There we go, okay. This is another mom who participated in our Mom Power group. So this is a home visit again, and this is her playing with her child. And you'll hear sort of the instructions as the task shifts. And just listen and observe, and let's talk about what you notice and see.
Oh, you want to eat that? You want to eat that, rooster? Something's on your head. Get it. Oh, it fell off. Mommy's going to put it back up there. Something's on your head. Do, do, do. Get it. Something. What you see? What do you see, mister? You trying to get in there? You can't get in there, mister. You just want to bang. Isn't that right? You just want to bang on that. Look, okay, we both can bang. Here you go. I bang.
Okay, you guys can clean up the toys now.
It's time to clean up for you. I don't want to, but let's see. Can you help mommy put these in there? Do you want to or no? No? You're trying to take them out? Let's see if this works. Come over here with mommy. Oh, mommy's big boy. Oh, let's see. You hold the rooster while I put these in here. No? Okay. You hold the rooster and you put it in there. He's putting the toys away. You want to help? Is that enough?
Okay. All right, let's stop there. What did you notice? What did you observe? She followed his lead when he was banging? Yeah, what else did you see?
Actually wasn't in the part we were supposed to watch, but the sort of like freeze frame that was playing earlier, and the smile that was on her face was like pride and joy. It was just so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you caught that, because I didn't do that intentionally, but you know what? It was not hard to hit one of those moments, so I'm not surprised that I did, because there was a lot of affective sharing that was really warm and loving, right? And a lot of pride and joy. What else?
I really liked when she was giving him some choices about trying to pick up a piece of my left, but he was wanting to explore, so she gave him something to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that was
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So she put him back onto the box and, yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
With what I liked was the fact that even when he was kind of being uncooperative by not actually like helping, like yeah, she gave him something else to do, but she still continued to keep trying to engage him by like, you know, making the little car go up the side and then back down, so that to try and get him to say, oh, well maybe we could do this. But she wasn't so rigid. She
Right.
couldn't work around it.
Right. So she was flexible and accepting of his needs, right? And that's really powerful. She didn't reject him for it. She said, okay, I'm going to work with you on that.
I was something similar to what she said. A lot of times we run into there's an expectation that it's not appropriate, and her expectation was not that he clean up,
Mm-hmm.
that he be there.
That's my phone. I can't blame anyone for interrupting my presentation. Sorry, you guys. Okay, I'm very sorry for interrupting your comment. You were saying that the expectations were developmentally appropriate. Mm-hmm. Yep.
But she still made him an active member of the experience. She just wasn't requiring him to clean up.
Right. Yep. What else? Uh-huh. She anticipated it. How did you know that? Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. This mom is like the best example of mental state language. She's like constantly making comments that show that she's thinking about his perspective, and it's so subtle. So when we think about reflective function, you know, that's reflective function in action, nonstop. Oh, you don't want this? Do you want to do that? Oh, you're not going to like that, are you? Want, like, all of those things say, I'm thinking of you as a person who has your own experience, right? And I'm using that to understand you. And the baby's, essentially, I think of it as the baby growing up in a bath of reflective functioning. I mean, the baby is going to, as the baby acquires language, not only is she altering her behavior to take his perspective and experience into account, but she's creating a language that's tied to that, that links what he might be feeling with words, right, that are sort of his experience. And this is incredibly powerful, right? So she's really high in reflective functioning, and he gets distressed, but does he fall apart? He does get distressed for a moment, right? But she doesn't give up. She seems to be not helpless, but efficacious. She adapts what she needs to do in order to keep him sort of engaged in the task. And he actually allows himself to be regulated by that. I mean, he got interrupted from his fun game. If you think in terms of the tree, it's also a lovely example of a tent. Did you all see how fast she moved when he pulled that thing down? Right? She was like right there, boom. It's not going to hurt you. And she doesn't get scared by that, and she doesn't get angry about it, but she actually allows it to become something that they can play together. So on many, many levels, I think it should be clear, and it sounds like it is, that this is a very secure dyad sort of moment. So let's just sort of underscore that when we see secure dyads, what we're really seeing is that parents aren't restricting their kids' attention or their emotional expression. They can balance attention to their own needs, but also towards the environment and towards the child. And there's this ability to go back and forth. There's a sensitive responsiveness to the needs and contexts. And that basically you see that the ability to express emotion is there. So he can express distress. He can also share. They can share together in the positive affect. We don't see his face so much in that clip, unfortunately. So we don't know exactly all of his affective expression in the moment, but you can kind of imagine, based on how it's going, that they've shared a pretty rich history of positive affective exchanges here, right? It seems pretty natural on mom's part to be in that place with him. I'm going to show you a different clip. And let's just watch this for a few minutes together. What do you notice? She says, she's no fun. You're no fun, she says. And she says, she's no fun. She's no fun at all. She repeats that several times in the clip. Overstimulating. Yeah. Focus on objects, right? A lot of focus on objects. Yeah. Right. Yep. Right. Right. So not sort of that reflective function of taking the baby's perspective about what the play is about here, right? Whereas the other mom sort of said, oh, you want to do this and I'm going to join you in it. This mom had a really hard time shifting from her sort of way of thinking about these objects to the baby's way of thinking. Were you going to say something? She seems nervous. And yeah, this is one of the first times, so I think you're right. There was definitely a sort of wish for the baby to perform in a certain way, I think, that comes across in this clip. But what's interesting is what do parents do with that? Because you can kind of see this as, you know, kind of like when you come to observe for the first time, if you're even without a camera, right? That it's, you know, what do parents do with that? That's potentially an anxiety or an arousing, vulnerable situation. And how is the parent going to manage that? What is the parent going to do with that distress? Kind of like what we see with the kids when we do a strange situation. What are they going to do with this? And in her case, one of the things that she's doing is, you know, she's getting anxious, but she's not sort of focusing on her child's needs or experience of this, or she's not articulating, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. Should I be trying to get him? Like she could ask, right? Should I be trying to get him to play with this in a certain way? But instead, you know, her attribution is a little bit more rejecting, right? You're no fun. That's a really good point. I never thought about that, but actually it's really true. The music is a da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da, right? And it's like, yeah. Yeah. Yep, absolutely. So just this like frenzied sort of nature to it. Absolutely. Yes.
I felt like mom was kind of, I don't know if she's a young mom, I don't know anything about her, but I felt like she was feeling insecure herself in what she was doing, and she really wanted to prove that she knew how to play with her baby, and that, you know, this is something that they did. And I feel like she was trying really hard to look competent.
Yes.
And she just wasn't.
And on the positive side of what you were saying, because I think you're bringing up such an important point, and I'm glad you did. First of all, good read. This is a 15-year-old mom, so she is a young mom, and she's also in our mom power groups. And I think you're absolutely right. She wants to show us that she can be a good mom, and she's trying, right? I mean, part of that, all the toys and the frenzy it is, I am trying to do what I think is the right thing to do. Oh no, I didn't read it that way. I read it exactly as that. I read it as you're pointing out, you know, she wants to show us what a good mom she can be, and that she wants to be that mom who can be a good mom. So I agree, absolutely. Was someone over here?
I noticed in the beginning, I mean, she is paying attention, though, to her, you know, I guess, I mean, she noticed what her baby was going for, sort of what caught his or her attention, and wasn't able to stick with that, but definitely.
That's right. So, you know, I mean, or that's a nice observation, I think, too, because she did sort of stick with toys and objects at times that the baby wanted to play with. And then sometimes sort of intruded her own sort of, actually, this looks nice to me, so play with this one. But there is this effort to really engage the baby in play, and that's a really nice thing. But I think that you've picked up on a number of things in terms of the object focus and the ways in which, you know, she's not sort of using her capacity to see the baby's perspective to guide what she's going to do in the moment, and the rejection, right? That sort of when she feels vulnerable and when it's not going, that where she goes is towards a more dismissive language, right? She gets more sort of, you're no fun, right? You're no fun at all. That sort of, that, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff going on here, and it doesn't fit neatly just in one place. Julie and I have talked about this a fair amount and sort of appreciate that the intrusiveness and the overwhelming could sort of be captured in other ways, but that in some way there's definitely a disengaging sort of avoidant style to this as well. And it's, oh, go ahead. No.
Says she did pull the toy back though when he went for it. That one time he was going for the toy, she moved it and pulled it closer to her.
Yeah.
And then started playing with it. And then his whole way of playing changed after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a complex moment, right? Like there are just so many things like that going on, and it's not characterized in one simple way. And I think in this sense, it's true to the observations that you're doing at home, right? That this is how we're, but you can see how these moments really tap into the affective regulation style, the balance of exploration and the safety and using the caregiver to feel safe. I want to show one more. So that was an avoidant dyad in some way. And then I'm going to show one more and then we'll break. Okay. This is mom who's in the room. Okay. Thoughts, reactions? Mm-hmm.
When the description of it was that the mom would re-enter the room,
Mm-hmm.
greet, offer comfort if necessary, and then try to engage with toys. It was right to the toys with no real connection between them, like
Yeah.
coming back in, touching, or talking, or just right to the toys.
Mm-hmm. 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 So right to the toys, although did you notice where her gaze was? What was she looking at the toys? So it's interesting, mom was playing with the toys, but looking the whole time right at baby, which is interesting, right? Because I agree, she did go back to the toys, but, uh-huh. Yep. Mm-hmm. 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 So the baby isn't very easily soothed, right? I mean, the baby stays in that pretty distressed place with the stranger and with mom, right?
She also didn't go straight to him when she finally went to
Mm-hmm.
comfort him. She stayed like just far enough away where he would have to then
Mm-hmm.
also move towards her.
Mm-hmm.
Odd, like I'll come this far, but you need to move me.
Yeah, interesting observation. And given his motor skills, when mom was out of the room, he was sort of immobilized, right? Like he was really distressed, but he didn't necessarily go to the door to get her, to bring her back, right? And then mom came back and it was this sort of funny thing of, yeah, you've kind of got to meet me. It took a while for her to get to him to, pick him up. And was he comforted when she picked him up initially, or when they sort of connected physically? No. There's the turning outward, which was acknowledged, and also this sort of failure to be fully comforted, right? So even though you're back, I'm still in this sort of aroused, emotionally dysregulated state, right? Did you have something to add? Okay. Uh-huh. Yeah. Right. So, yes.
When the stranger came in, like they immediately stopped crying.
Mm-hmm.
Usually when a stranger comes in, either cry more
Mm-hmm.
or then go straight into the stranger.
Right. And it was some comfort, although still not totally comfortable and fine, right? Still sort of distressed, and when the stranger left, the leaving sort of triggers distress again. So you sort of see this, I'm just sort of aroused, and no one's really fully soothing or comforting that for me. So this would be more of an example of a more ambivalent, resistant, sort of affect heightening sort of style. And mom is a little bit more helpless in her, what do I do? How can I get you comforted? She's sort of trying all these different things, and she's right there looking at him, but not, I don't think, feeling very efficacious about, I know what I need to do to help you to feel comfortable and soothed, right? So more likely to have some shark music, I would think, about baby's distress and being really sort of aroused and dysregulated by that. And baby doesn't feel soothed or comforted because mom's distress and arousal isn't very well regulated either, right? So that would be more the ambivalent resistant style, which is actually where I am going to stop, because this afternoon, what you're going to have an opportunity to do is to hear from Julie about disorganization, about how that sort of fits with these earlier styles, because we do think, as you recall, that each of these styles is relevant. How you regulate your emotions is relevant even when you have a disorganized style. And then to present a case study and some more home-based video clips from our Mom Power study that we're doing together. So you'll have an opportunity to see, observe, practice, reflect with the queen of guiding that, I think. I'm very sad to be missing it. And if it were not for Poetry Cafe, I would be right here enjoying it along with you. But thank you for your attention and for all of the things that you noticed. I, again, learned and saw things I hadn't seen before. I appreciate that. And have a lovely lunch.